And that moves us to number 15 on the discussion agenda, which is discussion of proposed revisions to board policy IKF graduation requirements, Exhibit H.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. At this time, Chief of Academics, Tina McCaskill, will come to the podium to discuss our revisions. There'll be no action required tonight for this item.
Good evening. Thanks for letting me be here tonight. First of all, this was just approved in August. I do apologize for that, but the School Boards Association came out with some revisions, and there is just one small statement that was not in ours that has now been new to the updates in the manual, that it says the district must offer a standards-based academic curriculum organized around a career cluster system that provides students with individualized education pathways and endorsements. Coursework must be aligned with the student's personalized diploma pathway. When applicable, students will be offered national industry certifications or credentials. So that would be added to the policy.
All right, do I have any discussion? Mr. Satterfield?
Just really a comment. That's been the policy for quite some time. We just haven't put it in our policy.
It's actually new to the school boards. Like it's been not been in there.
It's been required for quite some time, though. It was state law.
Right.
Right.
It just hasn't been in the policy.
So I see there's the statutes are also added. If it was
No,
state
those
law.
are just links. They
Those are just
look
links?
blue, but because they're links.
Okay,
The School
okay.
Boards Association takes care of updating all of that. We don't do that.
Okay, for this one, okay, I see the second page. Any other, Ms. Huddle?
Well, that was my related question. So is this because it's state law? And is the law referenced in that was the thing, I couldn't see it in here.
Well, at the bottom, the South
The
Carolina
links.
Code of Laws,
Yeah.
the School Boards Association updates all of those laws. And so there is one that would be added here, but we don't add those. The School Boards Association will add those when we send this in.
I guess what my question is, in looking through them, I don't see one that talks about career pathways. I don't know.
I believe that's the one that would be added. Like if you look at the new School Boards Association policy,
Okay.
there is one listed, but we don't list those on our revised policy. When we send it to the School Boards Association, they update. That's my understanding.
Let me talk about this on our next discussion item. For that reason that Ms. Huddle is referencing, okay. Any other questions regarding this policy? All right, thank you, Ms. McCaskill. All right, so that brings us to discussion of our board retreat, which we held on September 5th. Because we held this meeting, I just wanted to September 15th. Did I say September 25th? Okay, 15th, not the 25th. Man, it's not even super late, but all right. So on September 15th, the board held a board retreat at Saluda Shoals. And I just kind of wanted to give some public feedback about that retreat, what we discussed, and allow board members to provide any comments if they wanted to. We're just trying to make sure that everybody knows what we talked about. I have some notes that I'll submit for the minutes at the end of this meeting for so that they're in our record. But our board meeting, this was a request by several board members just because we're a relatively new board. We've been working together for a little less than a year. We're all relatively new board members, and it's interesting because of FOIA and meetings, you can't just have conversations, and sometimes that causes conflict. Sometimes, folks don't know what's going on or what history is or any of that. So I had several requests for us to just be able to have a conversation, and that's really what the retreat was. We did properly notice that meeting through FOIA, and it was open to the public. It was very informal in nature. We had an agenda, we followed the agenda, and then the notes that I took followed the outline of the agenda. And there was no formal action. It was really just general consensus on how everybody, agreed or feels like is best practice to move forward regarding certain issues. So some of the things that we talked about agenda requests. There's always, conversations about how things get placed on the agenda, and everybody has different interpretations on how that works or should work or whatever. So we just had a conversation about that. It was the general consensus of the board officers, or not the board officers, the board members, that all agenda requests should be sent to the board secretary via email. And the board we have board officer meetings. So the board secretary will bring all of those requests to the board officers meetings. And board officers will determine the appropriate meeting agenda to place requests based off of what is on what's on the agenda, what is required to make sure that the board has all of the proper information to make decisions or have discussion. And the board secretary will send an officer meeting recap and any explanations as needed to the trustee making the request. And I believe we'll also make sure that, we all know that, we're all on the same page and we all understand that, the requests that are being made. There was a conversation about board member communications. And there were questions about, how should a board member communicate with the superintendent? How should board members communicate among board members? What are best practices? And so during this conversation, it was agreed that requests to the superintendent from individual trustees to provide detailed information and/or documents. Something that would require lengthy, research and time should go through the board chair. And the board chair will use discretion on priority and how to prioritize that. And if the board chair determines that the request is not an immediate priority, then the chair will bring that request to the board officers meeting to prioritize. And that will be based on what the body is working on at any given time. So there's not one person ever making any decisions on their own unless the board chair determines this has immediate priority, it's automatically going on the next agenda. But that way there is conversation being had, and that explanation will, obviously be shared. Communication among board members, it was just requested that, trustees should strive to be respectful in emails and during board meetings. And just, the conversation of blind copying and how that works was discussed. And, just a reminder that, the entire, if the entire board needs to be aware of a discussion, to blind copy to avoid any quorum, but there's not supposed to be discussion about board business among board trustees, because we obviously do not want to violate FOIA. All right, there was a conversation about board attorneys and what types of attorneys that the board uses. So we have a general counsel. We have board attorneys that are brought in that the board, they're not even board attorneys that the district uses for different issues that arise, whether it's, to handle special education needs or employment needs or things that don't rise to the level of us. And then we do have instances where we are engaging with attorneys, and like I said, we have a general counsel. So we've had some issues on communication with board attorneys and attorney fees and what our board policy says and doesn't say. And so the consensus was, as we looked at the policies, were that all board member requests for legal opinions or questions, should go through the board chair and/or superintendent to provide efficiency and to conserve legal fees. All of those answers will be shared with the entire board. And really the reason for this is so that we don't have individual board members that will ask the same question 5 times and we get billed 5 times for the same answer. Or that, you know, there's information being requested that the entire board isn't aware of, or, you know, it's really just you know, that's just what that is. Also, during that discussion, it was agreed that the board officers are going to add a discussion about this and a discussion item to a future agenda regarding the administrative rule for policy BDG, which is our board attorney and legal services, so that we can have that full conversation in public with the entire board. Right, so then we also talked about our superintendent evaluation, and based on our previous conversations with the board and the superintendent, we have previously identified the need to update our evaluation form and update that form used for the superintendent's evaluation. So the result of this conversation was that I'm reaching out to Attorney Kathy Mahoney to discuss a new tool to be used for an evaluation, which will include elements from our strategic plan, our annual report, and board priorities. And that draft tool is going to be brought back to the board for our entire conversation and to the superintendent. We're going to agree upon that so that we have plenty of time to understand the form and the expectations, and we're all on the same page. And to kind of clarify why we're doing all of this is because, like I said, we're new. We're not perfect. We don't do anything, you know, we're not perfect, and we want to improve every year. And so last year, because of that, there was a little bit of confusion on our evaluation forms and expectations. And so we just want to clear everything up so that we are all doing, the board and the superintendent are all doing the best job that we can for the district. And so that we're clear on expectations and all of that. So that was that conversation. Another item that was on the agenda to discuss was adopting and updating policies. I think we all kind of agree that policy changes should not be reactive in nature, and that regarding policy BGBGD, which is our policy on how to, you know, on adopting policies, on how to create policies, the administrative rule is a little outdated, so it's going, we think that it should be reviewed by the administration and then presented to the board officers or to put on an agenda to be presented to the board. Another kind of item that we discussed was, you know, how do board members request policy updates or requests? And I think it's easier if those requests are made through when I say I mean we all had this conversation, that policy updates and requests should be made through the board secretary, who will then bring that request to a board officers meeting. If there's clarification or further information regarding the policy, the board chair will follow up with the trustee to just make sure that we understand what the request is, and so that we can put that on the right agenda. We do want, and this kind of goes to the conversation we just had on discussion item 15, Exhibit H. Prior to a second reading of any of our policies, we think that the appropriate attorney should vet the policy and just provide the applicable statutes and or case law if available, just to make sure as we're updating our policies that we're, you know, that they're grounded in something, and that, you know, we're making sure that we have the language correct and we're protecting the district. And so I know that there was a conversation about, I know the School Board Association provided that policy to us, but there was a question on, well, what in that, I'm sure something in one of those statutes probably put that language in, but that's clarification that I think that the board may want. I mean, I don't know. Just my thoughts. Okay, and then we talked about board policy AE, which is accountability and commitment to accomplishment. And this was put on the agenda because School District 5 is going to undergo accreditation through Cognia starting in January of 2024. And policy AE was last updated in 2006. So at our next board meeting on October 9th, we're going to do a board workshop prior to that meeting to discuss policy AE. This is going to allow us time for the whole board to review and update that policy to conform to the current strategic plan. And then that will give us enough time to have that updated policy on discussion and then 2 readings to be passed by the end of this calendar year prior to Cognia coming in. So that should give us enough time because we have, I think, 3 or 4 meetings after that before the end of the year. And that way we have a conversation as a board prior to our October 9th meeting. Then we, all of the board members gave their top 3 priorities as a board member because everybody, we all were elected for various reasons, and everybody has their own feelings about what their responsibilities are and what's their priority. And so we wanted to be able to have that opportunity to just kind of hash that out. On my notes, I took shorthand notes, so it is by no means meaning to, shorten anything, but I've listed out what everybody's, the ones that we received, the top 3 priorities. Some had some more on here, and some of the things that were on here. I'm going to just I'm going to open it up, and if anybody wants, I could read it out loud. It'll be in our minutes, but I want to give everybody the opportunity to have a little bit of discussion if you want. I'm kind of looking for. If you don't, I can read them out or not, or you could look at the minutes. But basically, the overarching themes were, teacher retention and overall retention, employee retention is important, the student experience and emphasizing the whole child, greater focus on career readiness, our board image, our ability to work together, and board civility. And those were all very important to everyone. Academic progress and making, those academic progress, setting specific educational goals. There were more put in here, but I just wanted to kind of give an overview of the priorities of the board. So that is, in a nutshell, a recap of our board retreat, and I just wanted to, like I said, because it was an off-cycle meeting, I just wanted to publicly address what we discussed and allow any of the board members that wanted to add on to anything that I may have missed and have that conversation. I don't know. Mr. Satterfield?
Well, I'm not going to say anything that you missed, Ms. Hines, because I was one of the ones that requested that we have this meeting, and I learned a great deal. I learned a great deal from the other board members. I felt like our conversations were very good. We talked about procedural things which helped me sort of clear the waters and help me understand a little bit better about procedural things, the way we do things. It's helpful. One of the things that we discussed at great length, I thought, was just being as civil and as courteous as we can in setting the example for our students and the community on how we should act when we're at a board meeting. Saying thank you. And so thank you, Ms. Hines, for going through that stuff. But just showing that again, we get these messages frequently on our email from the State School Board Association, and they have something called the Civility Corner, because this is an issue with a lot of school districts. Things get a little tense or a little heated, disagreements, but there's never an excuse not to be civil or courteous to one another. It's okay to disagree, but in the end, it's whatever the board decides how they vote, and the majority, that's what rules. And you, whether you agree with it or not, you go along with the majority. That's part of being a team member, a board member, or any kind of membership. But I want to say thank you for having the meeting. Again, I learned a lot. I learned a lot more about my other board members that were there. I got a little insight as to how they think and the things that are important to them. But I'm excited about moving forward. I'm excited about some of the things that Dr. Ross talked about. I'm excited about having our next planning meeting and being able to work. We have some very bright people. That's another thing that I learned from at that meeting. We have some very bright people in this room. And if we can tie up all those loose ends, I really think we can do great things for kids. And anyway, that's all I got.
All right, anyone else? Okay, Ms. Huddle.
I wish that I could have been there, but I had a wedding dress appointment with my daughter that I wasn't about to miss. I do have a question, and I wanted to make sure I understood this right. I thought, Ms. Huns, I heard you say that it was agreed that requests by board members for information would go through the board chair. Did I hear that right? I did hear that right? Okay. I mean, I have two concerns with that. First, I have a concern with the words "it was agreed." You can't really agree on things, especially not something as substantial as that, without an actual vote and meeting with a vote. I'm also concerned that I think that contradicts board policy BEDH, which specifically addresses requests by board members and that they go through the superintendent. It doesn't say anything at all about them going through the board chair. Furthermore, I think it may potentially be illegal. I believe that I'm not a lawyer and I don't pretend to be one, but I think under South Carolina law, because this came up a couple years ago when we wanted to look at attorney bills, and I think we were told that board members have a right to request any information that they want. There should be no roadblocks to that request. So I'm going to follow the policy.
And I think the term agreed upon was more along the lines of it's the understanding. And I agree where you're coming from. I think where my talk track was during that meeting was prior, when we'd request information, Ms. Hammond would ask for specific information to go through her just to make sure there wasn't a duplicate of information. That was my interpretation of it.
That's not accurate. I mean, I can tell you I never went through Ms. Hammond for any request for information.
Okay, and I did.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
you may have, but the board policy, BEDH, I mean, BEDGA, and it says requests by members of the board. And it says that they make their requests to the superintendent, who may refer such requests to the Office of Community Services. And then it talks about they'll be processed whenever possible in a more expeditious manner. So, I mean, I don't think that you can have a workshop and make an agreement that overrides board policy.
I'm pulling it up on my phone just so that I see that. You're saying because
DGA.
we had, and it's not coming up. So, Ms. Huddle, I think that a big concern relating to this, and I'm going to ask my fellow board members that were there to also speak up, because what I do not want to happen is for anyone to think that it is me, and I do not want it to be said that it is me making all of these determinations on my own, because it is not. But I believe that this conversation, and when we say consensus, is really like best practices. I mean, we can, that's why we have this meeting, to be like, what do we expect from, from interacting with one another, so that we're not attacked, or so that we actually get along and we move the district forward in a positive manner, and to make sure that we all are aware of what limitations or restraints we're putting on the district office, and we aren't all duplicating efforts, and that we have understanding of what questions are being asked, so that when they come up in front of all of us, there's context. And so those were the conversations that we were having. Ms. Snipes, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, I was just gonna say too, that this outline definitely isn't intended to be, I don't think, a roadblock for anybody. Really, I feel like I just walked away with a lot of work, but we'll talk about that at another time. But seriously, we're really just looking at, I think with your concern specifically, the thought process was, how can we streamline the process, to Dr. Ross, a little bit better, just because we the board individually send a lot of requests, excuse me, and some of them aren't as quick as others, and so it's just sort of a look at how can we be efficient, and then not overload them at the same time. And I just wanted to chime in to Rebecca's point, to echo just that we at least at a minimum did have a conversation about it, so it wouldn't seem like it was one-sided.
And really, as I'm looking at the policy, I understand like where we were coming from with this. So this isn't like to stop any individual board member from talking directly to the superintendent. That is not like none of us think that that's reasonable. It's really when when a board member is requesting significant information, it's not necessarily related to what we are talking about as a board or as a district as a whole, so that it's, the superintendent is not being made to be felt like they have to drop everything to answer every single request, because that gets overburdensome, and the superintendent has expressed, and I'm not trying to speak for Dr. Ross, but over the last year or so, the superintendent has expressed that there's been a lot of requests made that interfere with his ability to run our district. So we just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, and so that when something gets brought up, we know where it's coming from. It's not that we disagree, with an issue, or that we're not interested, or that anybody has any individual agendas. It's that we all want to know what's going on, and that we have the ability to, all 7 of us, be prepared. So that's where that conversation was stemming from. And I believe that follows within board policy.
It absolutely does not, and I'm not going to do it. I don't think it's legal. It doesn't follow the policy. I will be happy to follow something to copy other people. I know this is directed at me. Let's not beat around the bush, okay? I asked for information, and I asked for information because I need information to make decisions. I need information when things go crazy to know, did they really go crazy? Because I don't really believe they usually do. But I have a right to that information. And I'm going to follow the board policy, and I'm going to follow the law. And if the district wants to choose to break that policy or break that law, then I guess we'll have to deal with it. But you can't go to a workshop and make a decision that we're going to change board policy.
We aren't changing board policy.
And I was
Ms.
never
Huddle.
even asked about the date. I've been gracious about this. Never even asked about the date.
This was scheduled months ago.
Exactly, months ago. You could have come to all the board members and said, here's 3 possible dates. What dates work for you?
Okay.
Never happens.
Mr. Scully?
Okay, first of all, it is absolutely within board policy. I don't agree at all that it breaks policy. If you look at it more broadly, it talks about going to the superintendent. And whether it goes through the chair or not, ultimately for any action to go to the superintendent, or that's what the policy does. And that's what you were saying and what we kind of talked about at the retreat, came up with it. It's policy is not necessarily always viewed at a micro level. When you look at it broadly, all requests go to the superintendent to be acted on. And that's what we discussed, and within whatever procedures we talked about at that retreat and agreed on or understood, that is firmly within our policy. So that's my 2 cents.
And you know, Ms. Huddle, you're right, like, there was no official vote, it's consensus, it's the whole purpose of the board retreat was for our board to come together and have conversations and get on the same page and, agree or disagree, which there were agreements and disagreements, and just conversation so that we can work together so it's not hostile every single time. And, that's really what the whole purpose of this retreat was, for us to get on the same page. I think it is counterproductive to argue about us having a meeting so that we could work together, to then come in and argue. Mr. Satterfield.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that this was not intentionally directed at anybody. It was like, how can we as a board be more effective? That's pretty much what it was. And we didn't vote on all those things or anything. We just talked about, using Ms. Snipes' talents more. Just finding ways of becoming a little more effective. Maybe streamlining it a bit, and making sure that if we sort of have a direction that everybody sort of agrees on that's effective in using the talents, then we all are on the same page. So, it's just a way of pulling it. I just thought it was a tremendous meeting and it pulled everybody together. So that's all I got to say.
All right, Mr. Hogan.
Last thing, first, I think with the retreat, my definition of casual was a little more casual than the others. So thank you all for allowing me to be in my t-shirt. Second, it was very productive from the sense that it gave us an opportunity to all of us discuss truly where our vision of District 5 is and where we see it going and how we can collaborate together and find common ground, amidst the disagreements that we do have. So I was encouraged from the meeting. I was encouraged after leaving the meeting. I'm encouraged to have another one when time presents itself. But for the most part, it was a very successful day.
I agree. All right. Do I have any?
Ms. Hines?
Yes, Ms. Huddle.
I just want to make one final point. I think y'all ran razor thin against FOIA. You can't say things like everybody sort of agreed on, making all these determinations. It was agreed. The consensus was. I heard those things said 4 times. Each of those things.
So let me ask you, Ms. Huddle, when we have a conversation, we just can't have a conversation? So you're saying that you can never have a conversation, the board can never talk amongst each other, we can never, ever try to agree?
Agrees on.
Well, that's what it's, okay, so you wanna play semantics on language, then I'll take
It's not
ownership, it's on
semantics.
me.
Go review
It was
FOIA.
open to the
It's
public.
not semantics.
Okay.
And we didn't vote.
We didn't vote on anything. I mean, we were just having a conversation.
All of these things
But
are
if you can't
suggestions.
Go
just
look
have
up
a
the
conversation.
Austin case.
Okay. All right. Mr. Hogan. Do I have a second? Second. Ms. Snipes, any discussion? All in favor? That motion carries 7-0. We're adjourned.